Hey everybody, welcome back to the channel. At the time I'm recording this, we have finally, mercifully reached the end of the 2025-26 exhibition schedule. The Calgary Flames played 8 games over what felt like 15,000 weeks. And this is the last time that they're going to be doing a super long preseason. Starting next season, 26-27, they will be playing 4 games instead of 8, and everyone will be better off for it. So farewell, long preseason. We will not miss you. But the interesting thing now is we can turn our attention to the regular season. And as we head towards the regular season, I must admit a bit of confusion. And let me explain the root of my confusion, friends. So a year ago, the Calgary Flames had gone through a ton of change. The 23-24 season saw a ton of in-season turnover. It continued in the off-season. And so they entered the regular season with, I would argue, big existential questions sort of up and down their lineup. And so I could understand skepticism a year ago. And so the betting markets reflected, I think, the general skepticism. The Flames over-under for points on most betting markets was 81.5. And so essentially people going, they might be 500. And so as we saw, they ended up wildly outperforming the betting market's expectations. They got 96 points. They finished within the regulation tiebreaker of the last playoff spot. They lost the last playoff spot because of a bad week in St. Louis. Had they gotten a point of any kind during their 2 games in St. Louis over a course of a few days, they would have made the playoffs, and the Blues wouldn't have. And that would have been kind of insane for a team so close to all those fundamental changes they underwent. And so this season, the betting markets have the point total set at 82.5. So after everything the Flames did and the growth that they saw, the betting markets saw the Flames' performance and went, they'll be much worse than last year. Even if you're taking the optimistic part of 82.5 and saying 83, that's a 13-point dip from a year ago. And you're also going, oh yes, our expectations for you have gone up by 1 whole point. And I am very confused by that. And so I figure for a discussion of how I see the Flame season potentially going, I'll just go up and down the lineup, position by position, and sort of explain, why they could be better, why they could be worse, and roughly what my expectations are. Because, I don't think anyone really has 100% clear thought processes on what the Flames are or could be, because it's changing constantly because of the nature of the roster. And I think going position by position might be the best way of sort of illustrating that sort of duality within the Flames this year. So let's get into it. First up, we will go to the goaltenders, because this is the most important position both on every team and in particular for the Flames. So a year ago, the Flames went into the regular season with 2 goalies who had never been starting goalies in the NHL, in Dustin Wolf and Dan Vladar. Dan Vladar had arguably never been a starting goalie for a while. He was a starter in the AHL, in the ECHL, and worked his way up. But even when he was with the Bruins, he was sort of a secondary guy, sort of trying to scrape into a full-time gig. And so, his move to the Flames allowed him to become at least a full-time backup. Meanwhile, Dustin Wolf had been a top dog everywhere he'd been, pardon the pun. And, ever since Carter Hart left the Everett Silvertips, Dustin Wolf has been the best goalie in every team he's played on, and conversely, the best goalie amongst the best goalies in every league he's played in. And so, heading into the season, the big question was, oh man, will Dustin Wolf figure out the NHL, or will the NHL figure out Dustin Wolf? And the answer was Dustin Wolf figure out the NHL. Dustin Wolf was one of the top goalies in terms of underlying performance in the entire NHL. He got Vezina consideration. He got Hart consideration. He was second in voting for the Calder Trophy as the NHL's top rookie. So he had a great season. Dan Vladar is gone. He's replaced by, at least to start the season, Devin Cooley. Devin Cooley was very, very, very good to start the AHL season and with the Wranglers last year. He had a concussion in January. He came back. He was not himself. Anyone who's had a concussion and tried to go back to non-athletic things, even when you're symptom-free, it's tough. It takes a while. And I can't imagine what it'd be like going back to your job, being a professional goalie and having projectiles lobbed at you at high velocity. And so, Cooley wasn't very good at the back half of the season. He's looked decent in training camp, but hasn't really shown the flashes of brilliance he saw last year. So if you want to say, hey, will the Flames goaltending be better or worse? I will argue both, skewing towards better because Dustin Wolf will have another year under his belt and the confidence, and I think he's still going to be learning and adapting, and he's a freak. He's driven, he's motivated, and he's very smart and athletic. And I think he's one of those guys that he hasn't reached where he wants to reach in terms of his performance. The worst is two-pronged. One, goalie and video coaches throughout the league are very smart, and teams that got victimized by Dustin Wolf last year will be spending a lot of time poring over his video to look for traits and tendencies. We saw a bit of it in the second half last year when the Flames used him a ton, and so I think he will have a tougher go of it. Similarly, Devin Cooley, I don't think the Flames or anyone can or should yet have the confidence in Devin Cooley's usage that they did in Dan Vladar's. Dan Vladar simply had a pretty decent track record, reasonably big track record for a backup of his age, but a fairly large, fairly decent track record as an NHL goaltender, so you kind of knew what he was, and so you can use him in different situations. And the Flames used him in the first half of last year to insulate Dustin Wolf from scary, scary usages until the second half of the year where they threw him into it and just basically became the Dustin Wolf show featuring the Calgary Flames. And so this year, it's going to have to be the Dustin Wolf show. And Cooley and potentially Ivan Prosvetov, if Cooley isn't up to snuff, he's going to be a spell-off guy. He's not going to be a protect Wolf guy. They will use the backup goalies based on everything we know about these backup goalies as ways to keep Wolf fresh, not ways to keep Wolf protected from scary opponents. So it's going to be the Dustin Wolf show. And so I think Dustin Wolf is up to it, but there are no secrets in the NHL, and I think a lot of teams are really going to be keying in on Wolf and going, okay, how do we figure this guy out? How do we beat him? So that's goaltending. I think if you're asking me to make a definitive notion, I think they'll be slightly better in net, but they're almost going to have to be based on everything we know about how the position works if they want to move forward. So that's goaltending. Let's move on to the blue line. The blue line's weird this year, and weird in kind of fun ways. Let me explain. So the two big storylines on the blue line for the Flames are as follows. One, Rasmus Andersson will more likely than not be wearing a different jersey at some point in the season. The Flames and Andersson's camp have not closed the door on resuming talks, and I think you'd be silly to say, no, I'm never coming back, or no, get him out of here, because he's a good player. But based on the intel we have, the contract numbers that the Flames and Andersson's camp have aren't all that close together. And so I think they both understand each other's position and are very respectful and understanding, but I think they kind of know where this is headed. And so at some point when I think Elliot Friedman on 32 Thoughts said it very succinctly. When Craig Conroy gets his price, they're going to move Rasmus Andersson, and no one really knows when that's going to be. It'll be, I think, similar to how things unfolded with Elias Lindholm, where they didn't close the door on bringing back Elias Lindholm, but they all kind of knew where things were going. And then by midseason, I think it was the All-Star break, Vancouver stepped up to the plate, said, "Okay, we'll do it," and Elias Lindholm was wearing a blue jersey instead of a red jersey. So I think something similar will happen with the Flames. And so there's going to be a big hole on the blue line. Regardless of your thoughts on Andersson's performance last year, I think he'd be the first to say he didn't have a great year. A lot of weird things went wrong for him, but he also made a few uncharacteristic mistakes that we usually don't see him make. But he'll be elsewhere more likely than not at some point this season. Similarly, hey, here comes Zane Parekh. Zane Parekh's awesome. Very, very, very good OHL defenseman. I don't think it can be understated how damn good he was in the OHL. prodigious offensive numbers. Defensively, he was fine. He wasn't really used as a shutdown guy, nor should he have been. But he's going to be in the NHL full time, at least to start. They're going to give him every chance to be a full time NHLer. Offensively, I think he'll be fine. I think he'll figure out time and space and timings the way that Johnny Gaudreau did early in his career. Gaudreau wasn't amazing in his first preseason, wasn't amazing in his first handful of NHL games, and then he figured it out. So I think that's going to be one of those things where Parekh will figure out that side of it. But how a season goes will depend on how quickly he can be trusted in terms of using him in a lot of different situations. And the nice thing is, at least to start, they have Anderson, and they can insulate Parekh a bit. But at some point, they won't have Anderson. And so the big storyline will be, can Parekh potentially get up to speed as a usable in a lot of situations NHL defenseman before Anderson is in another jersey? And I don't know how long that'll take. And, the thing with the Flames is, if Parekh can do that, I think the Flames blue line group is probably as good as they were a year ago. Offensively, maybe a little bit better. We know more about Kevin Ball now. He's pretty good. We know more about Braden Pahal now. He's pretty good. Pahal, I think, is a little bit more limited in his usage, but, the Flames have learned some stuff about these young guys. But, are the fringes of their blue line, I don't think anyone's really extremely impressed with Jake Bean or Daniil Miramanov, and so I don't know if their spots are necessarily safe once the season starts. I think the Flames are going to be looking to improve year over year and making in-season moves, even just moving guys up and down. I don't think they're opposed to that, and so there's a push from below with a few guys making a case for themselves, and I think the Flames will have an eye on that. And so maybe we'll see Yan Kuznetsov at some point. Maybe we'll see Hunter Rustevich at some point. But I think the big storyline in the blue line is Anderson and Parekh, and how quickly the theoretical changing the guard in that position can take place and how smooth it'll be. So if you're asking me, are they better or worse? I'll say they're probably about the same. Potentially, it could be a little bit better offensively, maybe a little bit worse defensively, if that makes sense. But I think a lot of it depends on Parekh and how quickly he can adapt and learn and grow, and also how quickly it'll take for teams to get off their proverbial wallets and meet the Flames' price for Anderson. So that is the blue line group. Finally, let's go to the forwards. The forward group is very much the same as it was last year. There's not a lot of changes. The new faces from a year ago. There's a few. Justin Kirkland is in seemingly as fourth line center. At the very least, he's on the roster. I think the fourth line will have sort of a bit of a churn in terms of who's on it. Depends on who's playing well and who's really performing in that kind of a role. Morgan Frost and Joel Farabee are back. This will be their first full season with the Flames since being acquired from Philadelphia. Being traded midseason can be kind of disruptive, especially if you're those guys. You were traded from the only team you've ever known, and regardless of if you knew it was coming or not, moving to another city/country and learning a new coach, new everything, it can be very disruptive. And so having that season under their belts and that experience, and then having an off season to sort of breathe and get adjusted, could be very beneficial. And Morgan Frost in particular was very good for the Flames in the preseason. And so I think he'll be better. Farabee, I think he's still trying to figure out what his role is with the Flames. Could he be a Blake Coleman successor? Potentially. He's got that in him. He has that physical role. He plays the penalty kill. He's got that sort of grit. He's got the ability to score in bunches at times, but he hasn't done it consistently. And let's be honest, that probably is what contributed to his departure from Philadelphia. Meanwhile, other new faces we'll probably see. Kind of an interesting one that'll more likely he'll probably wobble back and forth between the AHL and the NHL this year is Matthew Gridden. Matthew Gridden was the late first round pick of the Flames in 2024. Picked in the same year and same first round as Zane Parekh, but picked late. They got him with the pick they got from Vancouver for Elias Lindholm, and Gridden really, really good. He was kind of an unknown. He played out in Quebec last year with Shawinigan, and he was very good offensively, and I think folks were not really sure of his details because, to be quite honest, I don't think a lot of folks really watched the Q in depth, but he was good in the Q. And You can always make a case of like, oh, the Q has crazy offensive numbers because no one really plays defense, so he doesn't really need to have great defensive details. And there's probably some truth to that, but he came into Flames camp and was very good. And when you added NHL players to the preseason rosters and things got more and more, resemblant of the regular season play, he still found ways to stand out and still found ways to generate scoring chances and score goals and just basically be a 19-year-old kid with a ton of swagger. And so he is a player that could be in the NHL, the AHL, or potentially the Q, although probably not the Q because I think he's probably outperformed the Q. He is seemingly going to be on the Flames NHL roster to start the regular season. Once everybody gets healthy, Jonathan Huberdeau is day-to-day as we're writing this now. Once he gets healthy, once they're entirely healthy and up to stuff, I don't know if there's a regular spot in the top 9 for Matthew Gridden, so he probably goes back to the Wranglers at some point. But he's a guy that the beginning of training camp I went, he might need some time to learn how to be a pro player. We might not see him for a little bit. Oh well, we're going to see this guy this year. We're going to see him this year. I think we're going to see him more. If he splits the season 50-50 between the NHL and the AHL, I would not be surprised. And he's a guy that has the ability to score goals and has scored goals against NHL players, NHL goaltenders. He scored a very nice goal against Connor Hellebuyck in the preseason finale. And so if you're going to yourself, will the Flames forward group be better or worse than they were a year ago? I would argue better. I would argue better because I don't think Yegor Sharangovich will be a snake bit offensively. I don't know if Blake Coleman will be a snake bit offensively. I think Morgan Frost will be better. I think Matt Coronado will be better. I think the guys that found their games again, Kadri and Huberdeau in particular, will keep their games, or at least their games won't regress terribly. I think they'll stay about that level. And the guys that kind of had down years, I think you could sort of see at least a few of them have bounce backs. Maybe not to their, I don't know necessarily if Sharangovich and Coleman will both be 30-goal players again, but if they're in the 20s, I think you're happy with that. And Coronado and Connor Zary, especially if Zary stays healthy, knock on wood, I think you can reasonably expect steps forward for them offensively, especially like Coronado, is going to be getting heavy power play reps. If there's an offensive situation where they need a key goal, he's going to be given every opportunity to score it. And again, if you have the ability to get Matthew Gridden into your roster, if somebody gets hurt, if your choice is moving up, one of your fourth liners, the top 9, or just bringing up Gridden, they'll bring up Gridden. That's what I think they'll end up doing. And so their fourth line, I think, will be kind of a question mark. It was a question mark last year. I think that'll be collectively about as good as it was a year ago. But I think the top 9 has the potential to take a step forward offensively. In terms of the defensive play of the team, I think it'll possibly get better. I think it'll probably end up being close to the same. You have Michael Backlund on the team and Blake Coleman on the team, so I think they, as the two-way conscience of the forward group, I think will continue to be relied upon. Morgan Frost, I think, will be potentially used more of as a 200-foot player and sort of have the time to sort of potentially learn from Backlund and become. They don't have a successor with Backlund yet in terms of being that the conscience of the forward group, and I think they need that, and I think they know that, and I think at the very least. Frost is a contender to be that successor, but we'll see how that goes. But it's one of those things where the forward group still has some question marks, but I think collectively they'll be a little bit better. So that's the forward group. And finally, let's look at the big picture for the Flames. To be quite honest, it feels to me like they will be about as good as they were last year. And by that I mean, do I think the Flames are going to make the playoffs? I think they'll be in the mix at the very end. I don't think they're bad enough in terms of having gigantic holes in their roster to completely fall into the 80s for points or in the high 70s for points. The wheels aren't going to fall off. The bottom's not going to fall out. They are a team that has enough talent, especially in goal, that I think they'll be afloat for most of the year. And, I think they'll be, much like they were last year, within spitting distance of the playoffs to the bitter end. Will they make it? I think that depends on the details. Last year, their power play wasn't very good. Last year, they could not buy enough wins in overtime to make it over the hump. Their penalty kill up until the last quarter of the season was quite bad. And they had a handful of forwards that just could not bury things. The Flames were, at 5-on-5, one of the worst teams at 5-on-5 shooting percentage in the league, which was a combination of, shooting percentage is a product, depending on who you ask, on finishing ability and luck. And they are intertwined. And will they have more players with finishing ability getting more offensive zone reps? Yeah, probably. If you're replacing, all due respect, Dryden Hunt as a top 9 fill-in guy with Matt Bigridden, I think you probably do a little bit better in terms of finishing those kinds of chances. And so I think the Flames, they're starting to get that skill influx from their minor league system and their drafting group to potentially move the needle in terms of their ability to finish. How the luck turned out, I don't know. That's the way luck is. Sometimes the hockey gods just laugh at you, and every chance you get hits the post or misses the net by 2 inches. That's just what happens sometimes. But I also think that the Flames are going to be in a position where as painful as it will sound to Flames fans, you're probably going to be looking at the proverbial week in St. Louis making the difference. You will be 2 bad games or 2 good games away from making it, and I think they're going to be a team that sort of makes it or misses it by the skin of their teeth. And right now they arguably do not have that elite offensive player on their team right now. They have a lot of very good players. Don't want to diminish the skill level they do have, but they don't really have a Gaudreau. They don't really have a Tkachuk yet. And so they're going to have to do it by committee, and they're going to have to do it very painfully. They're going to have to inch by inch try to make their way in. They won't have the ability to outscore the mistakes, and so they have to play that kind of very frustrating defensive system, and they don't have the ability to outscore their defensive lapses. So it's going to be one of those seasons where we'll be sitting here in April, second or third week in April, going, oh man, can't believe they made it by a bloop goal in St. Louis, or an overtime win over Ottawa or something like that. Or I can't believe they missed it because they had a bad week in Ontario. It'll be that close. And so that's kind of the fun part about watching and covering the Calgary Flames, because, especially I think as we've gone through the last 2 years, they haven't been boring and the games have been kind of insane to watch at times. But I think the margin for error is basically nothing, and they're going to either make it or miss it by very, very, very small margins. And, we'll be looking back at it in a few months, wondering how they did it or wondering how they didn't. Well, that's everything I got for this video. Thank you very much for watching. If you have any comments, concerns, or queries, throw them in the comments. If you like this video, please click the like button. If you really like this video, please click the subscribe button. And we'll see you next time as the regular season begins on Wednesday night, October 8th, in scenic Edmonton, Alberta, with the Battle of Alberta to kick off the regular season. See you there.